You were referring before to the incidents in Australia, and they're expecting to see for the next 20 years oil coming up because of the heavy machinery that was used. So how long are we expecting to see oil sort of resurfacing in Bay of Plenty?
Yeah, you're probably referring to the recent events just in the last week of oil reappearing on the beaches, that sort of thing. The question was asked, is that fresh oil coming up from a shipwreck that is flexing and stretching? It could be oil from another vessel coming along. It could be oil and tar balls that have got sand around them, have sunk, are lying just offshore off the beaches and been thrown up during storms. We've sampled all of those tar balls, as well as some of the Pomoana species that were found moribund close to those areas. Once again, given the time it takes to get the chemistry back, it's frustratingly slow. We don't have that data back to date, but we will be able to determine whether it's new or old oil based on the weathering features of the oil, because some of the smaller molecules evaporate off. And also, as Dave indicated, we can identify the signature of Rena oil and identify whether it did in fact come from Rena or not. So I'm very sorry I can't answer that definitively right now, but the process is in action to be able to answer that question.
But I suppose in terms of volunteers were used instead of heavy machinery, so we wouldn't expect to see in 20 years' time.
No, not at all, because we have pretty accurate estimates of how much oil was lost from the ship based on how much was recovered from it. If all of that oil out of the ship had come ashore, we would have a very different scenario right now. So we have a good idea of how much was lost to the environment. There's also relatively good estimates of how much was scoured up by volunteers. Admittedly, it's grown in volume. You might remember the exact amount. It was 1,000 tonnes. So is that right? Of oily, sandy, oily material with weed and fragments of branches and things in it, all of that sort of stuff. So from that, you can deduce how much was actually lifted. So effectively, the inoculum, if I use that sort of term, the amount of contaminating material, most of that was taken away from the environment. There is material, of course, that has self-buried at night time and between tides and things like that. And that's the reason why these microbiological studies have been engaged. So they will be drilling down cores, going down 3 or so metres into the sediments to look at where there are bands of perhaps trapped oil on the beach fronts, and having a look at how the microbes are degrading that. Similar exercises are being done on the Gulf of Mexico spill in Australia and elsewhere to look at natural degradation processes. We have also, because you can't be everywhere at once and look everywhere, but because we are, as you are, mindful that there might be lurking fields of tar balls just off the beachfront at the bases of reefs and things like that. We've dived specifically in those areas, and there was a comprehensive program of sediment sampling just off the beachfronts from Papamoa up to almost Bowentown to have a look at whether there were some buried oil repositories, if you like, sitting there that might be thrown up during subsequent storms. Once again, that information is coming back as we speak. And then finally, we're going to be able to survey quite large areas of the seafloor that are beyond diving depths with this electromagnetic profiler from Germany. That's a unique tool internationally. It's submersible, and it's able to have a look at contamination fields. It particularly focuses on metals, but it can have a look at other anthropogenically or human-derived contaminants. So it will be able to provide us with a heat map, if you like, of the seafloor, showing where there might be hotspots of contamination. That might be, for instance, fallout from some of the slicks and plumes that have come out from the ship during very stormy conditions where it's difficult to monitor anyway.
Just a few more questions.
Just on the tar ball issue, is it really impossible to forecast how much longer until you've got that conclusive evidence?
We'll know in the next 2 to 3 weeks about the sediment sampling program. The electromagnetic profiling program is happening in November. The results will be returned instantly from that, pretty much, because it's a live recording, if you like. So by Christmas this year, we'll be in a position to have a more definitive statement about debris fields and tar balls, and also the coring have been completed by
can't look to any sort of overseas experiences? I guess they're quite different.
Well, every single one is different, and Dave can comment on some of the US examples as well. Certainly in Australia, the evidence, as we said, that if you don't get as much of the world out of the ecosystem as you can, it's there to re-engage. It'll be turned around.
I think one of the things, though, that maybe you're alluding to, about 3 weeks ago, the area of the southeastern United States where the BP Horizons spill was 2 years ago. There was a big storm down there and a hurricane that went through there, and there were a lot of tar balls thrown up on the beach there. And that's sort of typical of really large oil spills, that this stuff gets weathered and sequestered in the sediments, and they don't look like tar often because they've got sand and they're embedded in them. And after a big storm with the big deep orbital waves that come in, those get pushed up offshore. So one of the things that we're trying to do is sample along the coastline and see if we can identify any of those repositories out there. But I guess the other side of that is that you shouldn't be surprised after a big storm if some of these things wash up for, up to a few years from now, depending on how much of that actually ended up in those little gullies and that off the reefs.
I'm wondering if I can ask you a quick question. Then I could. As an iwi representative, these figures, granted their initial findings, there's still more to come, must be pleasing to iwi, considering that the Kaimoana supermarket was feared wrecked.
Yeah, I think that's very clear. The fact that things are coming back to where they once might have been is a really important area of progress from an iwi perspective. I think, though, from an iwi perspective also, there are other matters that are much less tangible than monitoring results, which are also of concern. So the fact that the Western science is producing results that say, our food basket is starting to sort of repair itself, and that soon we can safely go back to the food basket and gather what we want, that's very, very important to us. On the other hand, so are the things that are not tangible. So things like how our relationship with this body of water is being repaired. And that's as much to do with people's hearts and minds, the hearts and minds of the iwi and hapu along this coast, as it is to do with the science.